Here's the deal. There's a cap on what we can borrow called the debt limit, and only Congress can raise or lower that debt limit. So let me be really clear. This is really important to know. Raising the debt limit is about paying off our old debts. It has nothing to do with any new spending being considered. It has nothing to do with my plan for infrastructure or building back better. Zero. Both of which I might add are paid for. So if we're going to make good on what's already been approved by previous Congresses and previous presidents and parties, we have to pay for it. Social Security benefits, the American people are promised, salaries for servicemen and women, benefits for veterans. We're going to have to raise the debt limit if we're going to meet those obligations. And raising the debt limit is usually a bipartisan undertaking, and it should be. That's what is not happening today. The reason we have to raise the debt limit is in part because of the reckless tax and spending policies under the previous Trump administration. In 4 years, they incurred nearly $8 trillion. In 4 years, $8 trillion in additional debt. In bills we have to now pay off. That's more than a quarter of the entire debt incurred now outstanding after more than 200 years. And Republicans in Congress raised the debt 3 times when Donald Trump was president, and each time with Democrat support. But now they won't raise it, even though they're responsible for more than $8 trillion in bills incurred in 4 years under the previous administration. That's what we'd be paying off. They won't raise it even though defaulting on the debt would lead to a self-inflicted wound that takes our economy over a cliff and risks jobs and retirement savings, Social Security benefits, salaries for service members, benefits for veterans, and so much more. A failure to raise the debt limit will call into question Congress's willingness to meet our obligations that we've already incurred. Not new ones, we've already incurred. This is going to undermine the safety of U.S. Treasury securities, and it will threaten the reserve status of the dollar as the world's currency the world relies on. America, not only are Republicans refusing to do their job, they're threatening to use their power, to prevent us from doing our job, saving the economy from a catastrophic event. I think, quite frankly, it's hypocritical, dangerous, and disgraceful. Their obstruction and irresponsibility knows absolutely no bounds, especially as we're clawing our way out of this pandemic. Democrats will meet our responsibility and obligation to this country. We're not expecting Republicans to do their part. They made that clear from the beginning. We tried asking to no avail. We're just asking them not to use procedural tricks to block us from doing the job that they won't do. Meteor is headed to crash into our economy. Democrats are willing to do all the work stopping it. Republicans just have to let us do our job. Just get out of the way. If you don't want to help save the country, get out of the way so you don't destroy it. We don't have time to delay with elaborate procedural schemes, which Republicans' proposals require. Scores of votes without any certainty at all, many of which have nothing to do with the debt limit at all. And that's when accidents happen.
Can you guarantee that the U.S. will not breach the debt ceiling, that will not happen?
No, I can't. That's up to Mitch McConnell.
So it is possible that the U.S. will not pay its debts. That is possible.
I can't believe that will be the end result because the consequence is so dire. I don't believe that. But can I guarantee it? If I could, I would, but I can't. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Senator Manchin says the deal is off.
Now on the debt ceiling. Before the end of this week, the Senate must get a bill to the President's desk to address the acute crisis of the debt limit. President Biden was crystal clear in his speech this morning. If Republicans don't get out of the way and let the Senate take action now, our government will in all likelihood enter default for the first time ever. Sadly, The Republican position as the party of default has now become so extreme that they've blocked every single attempt to prevent a default from happening, putting our country in serious, serious danger. They've gone so far as rejecting their own requests for how the debt ceiling should be raised. Their own requests. We're putting those in action. They're now saying no. Why do you think? Why do you think? And now the Republican leader has repeatedly stated that the Democrats must raise the debt ceiling on our own, and he's directly cited precedents of 2003, 2004, and 2006, when the Senate voted to raise the debt ceiling by a majority vote. But what he conveniently and repeatedly ignores, and he knows better, he ignores that in each of those examples, the minority allowed an up or down vote without a partisan filibuster. In other words, the other side said, get us the 50 votes, and we won't make you get to 60. That's just what we're asking for now. We're proposing the same offer now, which Leader McConnell has cited. Let us vote to raise the debt ceiling without a partisan filibuster. In fact, this was the thrust of my consent request last week, which would have resolved this Republican-driven default crisis with an up or down vote. Republicans could have gotten their chance to vote no, and we could all have put an end to this needless impasse. But given the easiest way out of the mess, the Republicans still refuse to take yes for an answer. Now our country is on the brink of a crisis whose consequences will reverberate around the world. The bottom line is this chamber must pass legislation to avoid a default. Accordingly, I will soon file cloture on the House-passed proposal that will suspend the debt limit until December of 2022. We aren't asking Republicans to support it when it comes times for a vote. We only ask that they get out of the way as Democrats pass it on our own, just as the majority party did in the early 2000s. It's really that simple. If Republicans want to vote to stop payments from going to Social Security recipients or veterans, then be my guest. But they ought to get out of the way and let the legislation pass the Senate. The fact is, we don't have the luxury of waiting until October 18th to extend the debt ceiling. Even a near miss can have dramatic consequences. Every single day we delay taking action, we increase the chances of doing irreversible damage to our global financial system, our economic recovery, and trust in our country's ability to pay its debts. So again, we will need to get a bill extending the debt ceiling to the President's desk by the end of this week. We aren't asking Republicans to vote yes, even though it's debt that they incurred. We are simply asking that they get out of the way. I yield the floor and thank my
Republican leader.
I want to begin today with a quotation. Quote, because this massive accumulation of debt was predicted, because it was foreseeable, because it was unnecessary, because it was the result of willful and reckless disregard for the warnings that were given and for the fundamentals of economic management, I'm voting against the debt limit increase. Now, Madam President, that was then Senator Joe Biden in March of 2006, right before every single Democratic senator voted against raising the debt limit and made a unified Republican government do it alone. Here's another quote. Today's fiscal mess is the inevitable outcome of policies that consistently ignored evidence and experience. My symbolic vote against raising the debt limit would have been a protest of the policies that have brought us to this point and a demand that we change course, end quote. Well, that same speaker, then Senator Biden, 2 years earlier, in 2004, as Senate Republicans have made clear since last July, and as I reminded the President in a letter just this morning, his sentiments then are our sentiments now. His sentiments then are our sentiments now. For the last few weeks, Washington Democrats tried to forget that they lined up to oppose debt limit increases during unified Republican government. They pretended these votes are always bipartisan. Well, that was simply not true. So now our colleagues have moved on to yet another new argument that is equally flimsy. Now, they claim they'd be perfectly happy to handle this responsibility with 51 votes done one way, but they'd rather risk the nation's credit than doing it with 51 votes a slightly different way. Two different ways to achieve 51 votes. I'm not kidding. This is the position they're taking. The president said it today. The reconciliation procedure would be slightly more inconvenient, they said. A few more days, a few more votes they'd rather duck. The Democratic leaders running America are saying with a straight face that the entire U.S. economy should live or die based on the procedural convenience of Washington Democrats. Now, I've got no problem using the party line process over and over and over to spend trillions and transform the country. But now, for this purpose only, they suddenly and mysteriously find it unappealing. Democrats could not be more capable of handling this on their own. Just months ago, the Democratic leader won new powers to reuse reconciliation over and over. They don't even need our consent to set a vote at 51 instead of 60. They need even less help raising the debt limit than majorities needed in the past. So trust me, Madam President, if Republicans were sitting on a hidden veto power to stop reconciliation bills, you would have heard about it way back in the springtime. The majority doesn't need our votes. They just want a bipartisan shortcut around procedural hurdles they can actually clear on their own. And they want that shortcut so they can pivot right back to partisan spending as fast as possible. They want a bipartisan shortcut to get right back to more partisan hardball. And Republicans have spent 2.5 months, this is no surprise, 2.5 months ago, explaining that this is the way they needed to go forward on the debt ceiling. This unified Democratic government is having trouble governing. They couldn't even pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which the president negotiated and the Speaker of the House promised would pass last week. The majority needs to stop sleepwalking toward yet another preventable crisis. Democrats need to tackle the debt limit. We gave them a roadmap and 3 months' notice. I suggest that our colleagues get moving.